Hello, parents. Are you ready to teach your kids the most important Sunday school lesson of the year? Well, fear not if you are not prepared. That's what we're here for you. This video hopefully can help you as well as the other resources, some extra resources posted on the CPH website this week. So we'll have a whole bunch of handy resources available for you. This is the most important lesson. Yeah, last week's was really important, Jesus' death on a cross. But as Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 15, if Jesus is not risen, we are still in our sins. His death didn't accomplish anything for us in that scenario. So the resurrection is really the centrally most important thing in our lives, in the history of the world for that matter. So we'll zoom in. We'll take a look at the text. We're going to be studying from Matthew 28 today, but then we're going to zoom out and take a big picture view of the significance of what this story means. So to start with, we get to Matthew 28. It's after the Sabbath. The Sabbath is the seventh day, the day of rest, and now we have a new day, a new week. This is already significant. This is, if you will, the eighth day now. Yeah, if a week has 7 days, now we're in day one of a new week. But the number eight is in the Bible always significant in terms of newness. Something new has happened. That's why we have eight sides on a baptismal font. When someone is baptized, they are made a new creation in Christ. So that number eight is really important to signify newness. And now something new has happened. Something that has never happened in the history of the world. You know, back in the Old Testament, Solomon wrote that there is nothing new under the sun. And at the time he wrote that, he was absolutely right, that everything was some variation or deviation of something that had come before until now. This has never happened. And for that matter, it hasn't happened since. But don't let that fool you into thinking that this is a unique one-time occurrence. It will happen again. And Paul writes about this in 1 Corinthians 15, which is actually a good chapter, supplemental chapter to review as you study Easter. It's happened once for Jesus alone, but this is the first fruits of a much greater harvest to come. It's going to happen again now for all of us. And the day that Jesus returns, this is going to be the day of resurrection for everybody else. And so we have Jesus, for the first time, someone rising from the dead to never die again. That's kind of significant. There have actually been resurrections before this, or even since. I mean, now and then people who are clinically dead are revived. But what has happened here is a dead man, 3 days after being dead, has come back to life to never die again. He has defeated death. He hasn't just kicked the can down the road. He hasn't just bought some time. He has defeated death. So, it begins with these women going to the tomb. They're going to anoint Jesus' dead body with spices. This was a burial custom of Jewish ladies back then. They set out early in the morning. They can't do it on the Sabbath. They can't work on the Sabbath. So the first opportunity they have is early Sunday morning, and they go to the tomb, and what they see is more than they bargained for. Yeah, I don't know how they thought they were going to get in with that stone and the guards posted, but they were going to give it their best effort. Kind of a faithful thing when you think about it. These women going to the tomb, not knowing how they're going to get in, but they are so determined to anoint Jesus out of love. They want to anoint his dead body. But they get there, and there was an earthquake, and there's an angel sitting there, and there are these guards who are like dead men because they're so afraid. And the angel says to the women, who are also probably pretty afraid at this point, don't be afraid, for I know you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has risen as he said. In other words, if you're paying attention, and Jesus did say this a couple times during his ministry, that he would die and rise again. And so now the angel's like, this shouldn't be a huge shock for you, but he has risen as he said. Come and be a witness here. Take a look. See the place where he lay. Notice it's empty. He's not here. And then go and tell the disciples that he has, in fact, risen from the dead. And then go to Galilee where you're all going to see him again. Really interesting here that women are the first witnesses of the empty tomb. And this is interesting because in the ancient world, their testimony means nothing. Yeah, I mean, sorry, that's just the way it was back then. Women weren't allowed to testify in court, and they wouldn't have been able to testify to anything they saw. They could at best tell their husbands, but they are not legally enabled to speak on matters such as this. And yet God chooses to make them witnesses. And also, interestingly, Matthew, when he writes this account of the resurrection of Jesus, chooses to ground the testimony in these first witnesses, these women. And this actually is something biblical scholars have pointed out really validates today the truth of the resurrection. If Matthew was in on some great scam, if Matthew was attempting to perpetuate a hoax here, he would not have written about women being these witnesses. He just wouldn't have, because he would have, if he's making this up, he's going to make the story as strong as possible for the people in his day. And if he's making it up, of course he's going to have the disciples themselves as the original eyewitnesses of the empty tomb, men. But instead, Matthew plays it down. He basically writes what he knows to be the truth. And the truth, like it or not, is that, and at that time people wouldn't have liked it, is that women first saw the empty tomb. So at that time, this actually would have been detrimental to the account of the resurrection. Now at our time, it's actually, and see, God's playing a long game. He's got the big picture here. In our time, this actually makes it more valid. The fact that Matthew at his time wrote about women as the witnesses. So anyway, Matthew writes about women being witnesses here. And they first see the empty tomb, and then, behold, Jesus met them. So again, the first witnesses here of the risen Lord, these women, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. This would be, remember, Mary and Martha. And they came up and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. That's a pretty significant detail back then. They had, in the Greek world, in the ancient world, a notion of ghosts. Similarly to today, people believe there are ghosts and departed spirits haunting the world. We as Christians believe that any spiritual entities in the world are not departed souls, but rather angels or demons. Anyway, they take hold of his feet. The understanding in Galilee in the first century, ghosts don't have feet. And so when they take hold of his feet, they are recognizing he's real in the flesh. He is resurrected in the body. That this isn't just a spirit of Jesus, that this is actually the Lord himself, risen from the dead, body and all. And then Jesus says, do not be afraid, which seems to be a common theme here, right? We heard the angel say, do not be afraid. We heard Jesus say, do not be afraid. This is the most common command in the Bible. Don't be afraid. We live in fearful times here. Don't be afraid. Why shouldn't we be afraid? Because Jesus is risen. Worst case scenario, you die. Worst case scenario, you're coming back from that. Jesus is the first fruits of many more to come. And then Jesus says, go and tell my brothers, bear witness. In verse 10, this is a pretty important command for all of us. I mean, we haven't beheld Jesus the way these women did, but we are all called to witness. Simply tell other people what you know, what you believe, and leave it from there. And then kind of a postscript to the account here in verses 11 through 15, we get Matthew talking about this other hoax that actually is perpetuated. They're not the hoaxsters, but you've got these religious leaders who are bribing the guards, saying, we're going to tell a story that the disciples came in the night and stole him away. Now, there's a lot of things wrong with this story. We've got a Roman seal. It's not mentioned here in the Matthew account, but in other Gospels, Pontius Pilate gave his seal to be placed on the tomb. And so there's a string around the rock, and this is, if you break this seal, it's punishable by death. Of course, the angels aren't too concerned about that when they break the seal. But this is just all the much more proof the disciples, didn't go in and steal the body. First of all, there's guards there. There's a seal in place. There's nothing here that would indicate the disciples could have pulled off such a thing. In fact, The disciples, when we see in the Gospel of John what they're up to, they're cowering in fear. They're afraid that they're going to be next. So anyway, lots of proof here, and Matthew is putting out a lot of evidence for people to truly believe that Jesus has really and truly risen from the dead in the flesh. And then Matthew goes on, he essentially says, if you hear this story that the disciples stole the body, well, now you know why. Now you know where that story came from. It came from these religious leaders who are seeking to, why would they do such a thing? Why would they lie about it? They just can't come to grips with the reality that they've actually crucified the Son of God. They would rather live a lie than to face the truth. All right, now let's zoom out. Let's take a look at the big picture. What does this mean for us? Well, we've actually already hit on it a little bit. Something new has happened, something that signifies something greater to happen. Because of the resurrection of Jesus, this still isn't the last piece of the puzzle here, but this tells us how the puzzle is going to turn out. Because of the resurrection of Jesus, death, which has reigned in the world since Adam, is now going to be put underfoot. Death is not underfoot right now. Death actually is still stinging, and we certainly see that in the headlines every day. And so this is why the Easter lesson is more appropriate than ever this year. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that. It's always appropriate, but maybe resonates a little bit more with us. In a world where we are now surrounded by accounts of death, we have the guarantee that I like to compare it to like a grip. Last week's Palm Sunday sermon, I talked about gripping. Death had a grip when Adam and Eve first sinned. Death put an iron grip on the world, and Jesus' resurrection is a loosening of that grip. When Jesus returns, the grip will be completely released. But that day is now guaranteed to come. The resurrection is the first fruits of a harvest to come. The curse is being reversed. And each day now, in this era of Easter that we live in, since Jesus rose from the dead and this 8th day new creation that is coming about, each day life is breaking into the world. Death is still out there, but the words of Jesus, the hope that comes from his resurrection, each day in some way, shape, or form is breaking into the world. Every day that somebody is getting baptized, every day that somebody is coming to faith, every day that somebody is doing something to fight death, when those healthcare workers are standing on the front lines, risking their own health and well-being in order to fight death, this is actually Jesus' resurrection breaking into the world. We know death will be defeated, and so therefore now we're fighting death. We know that the tide is turning here, and the fruits of this will be seen in the day of his return. So that's kind of the big picture here. As you think about how to teach this lesson to your kids, you can touch on some of those big theological themes, emphasize some of the certainty. We know for sure that he rose from the dead because of some of these aspects of the witness accounts. But at the end of the day, just the important thing for the kids to know is that Jesus didn't stay dead, and that means any who belong to him who die are not going to stay dead either. If you remember last year around the Easter season, we talked about the false summit of heaven. Let's also make sure to teach our kids our ultimate hope, what we're looking forward to. If you kind of missed that sermon series last year, you don't remember it anymore. A false summit is when you're climbing a mountain and you get to what you think is the top, and it's not really the top. Heaven is a false summit. It's not that heaven is false. Heaven is real, but heaven's not the end. When we die, our souls go to heaven, but if our body's still here, laying in the ground, that's not the good creation that God intends. So the return of Jesus, the resurrection of the body, dead people's souls being put back with resurrected bodies, body and soul reunited again, just like Jesus had this real body with feet and all, that's what we're looking forward to. And finally, a couple of just recommendations if you're looking for family viewing, what to watch on Easter. There's always a lot of good Christian programming out there. But a couple that I would recommend, there's a movie called Risen. We took a group from church to see this a few years ago. It is a story that mixes the fictional some fictional stuff with a Roman centurion who's given the job to investigate the resurrection of Jesus. There's nothing in the Bible that indicates that anything like that ever happened. But it's a neat way to kind of a lens to explore the true events that are recorded in Scripture. So the movie Risen, which is it's not on any streaming service that I can see, but you can pay $3 to Amazon and download it and watch it. I think it's on YouTube for like $4 for a rental fee. So the movie is called Risen. Um, the other movie that it's a drama about the life of Lee Strobel. It's called The Case for Christ. It's about a guy who didn't believe in Christianity at all, and then became one of the great Christian authors of the 20th century. And the story is about his journey from unbelief to faith. And a lot of it explores the resurrection. You know, somebody early on in the movie tells Lee Strobel, if you can show that Jesus couldn't have risen from the dead, that you can take all of Christianity down. It's all built on that. And so he spends a lot of time investigating the different theories about what actually happened to Jesus' body, and he explores. Well, I'll let you watch it. It's actually on Netflix. For those who have Netflix, you can just watch it. It's called The Case for Christ, and it's also available from other streaming services for rent. But if you have Netflix, you don't have to pay anything. Case for Christ. All right. Well, God bless you. Have a blessed Easter. I hope you still get a chance to have Easter egg hunts or whatever tradition your family has at home. I know my family does what we call resurrection Easter eggs. We got a set on Amazon that a few years ago that every year we use to kind of retell this Easter story. But whatever your traditions, I pray that you have an opportunity to continue to put the resurrection of Christ at the center of your Easter joy. God bless you and have a good week.